Welcome to the Future Jam, a very special Future Jam. We're joined today by Ian Arbuck from Extra Dimension. This is a crossover episode, and the episode we recorded on his channel, what's that one called, Ian?
So that one is the philosophical and ethical implications of the singularity. And if you want to listen to that episode right after you listen to this one, you can go to thenexus.tv/TED31.
And we'll put the link in the description of this episode. And obviously,
Yep.
Harrison's here.
I'm back.
Yeah, I don't know why you have to say that every time.
Well, one day you're gonna miss this beautiful voice.
Are you quitting on this episode?
I don't know. I'm just waiting for you to just fire me one day because of something crazy I say. So I'm just buying time.
Obviously, if you didn't guess it, we're talking the singularity today, and it's basically the idea of reaching the singularity, like the path to it. Let me start off real quick by explaining to all you listeners out there what the singularity is. So the singularity, or you could call it the technological singularity, that's kind of like a tongue twister, is the idea that the creation of artificial superintelligence could result in an unstoppable exponential growth. This rapidly advancing technology could alter the world as we know it. So, did that make sense at all?
Yeah, so the way that I always think about it is like the singularity is like the moment when we create a computer that's able to design the next best computer faster and better than we are able to design that next best computer. And so at that point, then humans are no longer like necessary or desirable really to be in that design process. And so then, technology can improve at a rate that we can no longer keep up with as just normal unaugmented humans.
And you bring up a good point, augmented. Because,
Yeah.
if you look into this even just a little bit, you realize that basically the only way to keep up is to start taking on augmentations, to be able to see better, to be able to process better, to give your mind upgrades, whatever there may be needed to basically keep up with this technology. There's going to be a biological and technological merging during this time.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Harrison. But some might ask, how did we even get this idea in the first place? And it's actually kind of a rather old idea, the singularity. It's been around in like sci-fi books and movies for years, and you've seen it. It's been in pop culture for a while now. I found one of the first utterances of it from an old 1983 magazine. It's Omni magazine. And I actually pulled out the text from it. And it's from an author, Werner Vinge. Have you heard of him, Ian?
Not outside of this context. All I know about him is that he's the first person who used the phrase "the singularity" to refer to this phenomenon.
Yeah, I pulled a quote from his article, and I thought it was pretty interesting. It's kind of a long quote, but I'll read it real quick. And we are at the point of accelerating the evolution of intelligence itself. The exact means of accomplishing this phenomenon cannot yet be predicted and is not important. Whether a work is cast in silicone or DNA will have little effect on the ultimate results. The evolution of human intelligence took millions of years, and we will devise an equivalent advance in a fraction of that time. We will soon create intelligence greater than our own, and when this happens, human history will have reached a kind of singularity, an intellectual transition as impenetrable as the knotted space-time at the center of the black hole, of a black hole. And the world will pass far beyond our understanding.
Yeah, and so like that kind of imagery of, comparing this event to a black hole is kind of like it's pretty central to the concept, right? Because a black hole is a, this point of like essentially infinite mass, not literally infinite mass, but for all intents and purposes, for all of our measurements that we make from it, right? It's infinite, and like we can't see what's happening inside it, because there's no light that's escaping from it, right? And that parallels this concept of the technological singularity very, very nicely, because it's this point at which the technological progress is at such a level that we can't comprehend it, we can't measure it, and also we can't predict what forms it's going to take, how it's what it's going to look like, really. Of course, that's what we're going to try to do today is, we're going to try to predict some of those eventualities. But
I love how this is from 1983 and it feels so timeless. It feels like this is what's like going on now even. And the part I highlighted is where he said silicone or DNA. And I thought that was kind of an interesting comment to make, even from the 80s, where he was saying it might even be of our own DNA, or it might even be not just technological advances, but it might be like biological advances as well.
I think it's going to be a little bit of both.
Yeah, I just thought that was very interesting that people were even thinking of that concept way back in the 80s, before I was even born. Well, much of us.
A few episodes ago, we were talking about how we're going to do lab-grown meat, and the fact that people were already talking about that kind of stuff in like the 50s or something like that. I mean, these people on the edge of our technology, they see things that we don't. So that's why this kind of topic should be very, very interesting to you guys, because you think that because you have a smartphone, you're like right there on the top of all the tech. You might have some awesome computers, but guess what? Like, these people at the top of the food chain as far as like tech goes, they see things that you have no idea, and they can't even talk about it. They want to. I bet you they do, but we just got to sit back and wait and see what happens.
Yeah. Speaking of smartphones, Harrison, people take for granted like how powerful a smartphone in your pocket is. And what do they usually say, Ian? Is it usually said that the computer they use to send people to the moon, our cell phones are more powerful technically than that?
Oh,
computer?
Yeah, we were saying that about the TI-83 calculators that I was using in junior high. Like they were like, this is as powerful as the Apollo mission computers that were in Houston, and they filled up an entire room, and they cost bajillions of dollars, and now you can buy this little thing that does graphing stuff for $80.
And that kind of demonstrates Moore's law. Like, can you explain in a nutshell what Moore's law is?
Yeah, so Moore's law is actually a really, really specific example of this exponential growth that we're talking about. And so I'll talk about Moore's law, and I'll also talk about kind of the broader context that it fits in. So Moore, I don't remember his first name, but this guy Moore was one of the higher-ups at Intel in the 1960s, 70s, something like that. And he observed that the number of transistors that we can squeeze into like a given area on a CPU was doubling once every 2 years or so, right? Sometimes, over the course of history, it's kind of been like sometimes it's 1 year, sometimes it's 2 years, sometimes it's in between, right? But it's been fairly consistent, where we have this doubling rate, and so that translates into like the price of transistors of these CPUs has halved every 2 years or so, and the processing power, the raw processing power of the CPUs has doubled along with the number of transistors that we're packing in there. And people have, predicted the end of Moore's law many, many times. At this point, we do seem to be kind of butting up against the physical limits of how close together the transistors can be, because we're starting to run into problems of quantum tunneling and stuff that is it sounds like magic,
Right.
And so yeah, Moore's law is it seems to be we're gonna hit the plateau pretty soon. So if you think about this technological progress as a graph, right? You have the exponential part where it's like it seems flat at first, and then you have like that knee of the curve, and then it starts going straight up, right? And that's the really exciting part, is the straight up part, where we're like suddenly getting all these new, advances and everything. But then a lot of times there's the plateau at the top, right, where it goes from being vertical back to being horizontal. And that's the kind of curve that you would expect to see, for example, if an invasive species is introduced to Australia, right? And then they like spread a whole bunch. They multiply very, very quickly. But then as they kind of reach the edges of the continent, right? They can't spread any farther. They can't just keep multiplying forever. It kind of plateaus. And so what we see usually in technology is that like each individual technological like paradigm follows an S-curve, right? And if we think about computing specifically, currently we use transistors for all of our computing needs. Before transistors, we used like vacuum tube computers, right? Before that, we used like punch cards and stuff like that. And just like purely mechanical switches. And each one of those followed an S-curve, right? At the beginning, we saw like just a little bit of progress. Then we had an explosion as, they figured out like this is how this technology really can take hold. And then, it was like, okay, we're going to hit the plateau and maybe we won't be, following an exponential curve anymore. But then they find the next best thing, right? And so even though we're following this series of S-curves, if you zoom out far enough and take a look at like the entire progress all as a whole, then we have an exponential curve overall, which is really exciting.
So you're kind of saying how now we're kind of reaching the plateau of how we make chips currently, but there might be new methods down the road that will boost that curve because we'll switch to a different method.
Yep. And so like the question right now is, what method is it going to be that, replaces transistors? It could be quantum computing, right? There's been a lot of research going on around that. It could be like I forget what it's called, but it's like creating 3D transistors instead of on a flat 2D plane kind of thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm not a hardware engineer, so I can't tell you very many details on any of them.
Well, shoot all your hardware-related questions to Ian Arbuck at yahoo.com.
But yeah, I don't know. As far as like the people that are really taking a look at these like future kind of things, I mean, Ray Kurzweil, of course, is like the big guy that is always talking about the singularity. He's like the one that kind of took the torch after the first guy kind of coined the phrase. And he's still holding on strong to 2029 being the time, where that exponential curve just breaks to that spot where man and machine could possibly be merging. And you know what? Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing where that next technology goes, whether it's like some sort of like nano technology or some sort of like biological thing. I think I even like heard at Ohio University, actually, right near where we're recording, actually, they're designing a human brain, like basically from scratch, like a completely blank slate of a human brain, and they're trying to like figure out if they can like program it outside of like a body, like there's like different kind of like Frankenstein sort of things that could be emerging. So I don't know. There's some interesting technology coming out of this.
There is, and kind of where are we at in AI? So what was it like in the 80s, 90s when we had like the computer that beat the professional chess player?
Yeah, Deep Blue.
Deep Blue, yeah. I found when I was researching that, Deep Blue, the chess player got beat, and he was really mad, and I guess he thought the programmers had cheated because the computer, I guess, either glitched or made a choice that he didn't expect, and that one choice, it confused him so much that it messed up the whole rest of the game. So that was the first. When was that? Was that late 80s?
That was 1998 or something like that.
98. Sorry, I'm off by a whole decade, but
It was around the time that StarCraft came out.
Yeah, so that's kind of the first sign that computers were getting like better. They could kind of stand on their own a little bit, and then
What was even more interesting, I don't know if this was what you were about to say, but then they basically took the similar technology and had them go against our world champion of Jeopardy and destroy him. So that just basically showed the evolution of not only knowing how to play a game that we've designed, but also to understand the language, and not just to have all the answers, but to actually be able to search it out and like put it out in the way that it's needed.
so that's an interesting idea though, because it was IBM Watson that
Yep.
beat the world reigning champion in Jeopardy, and I don't think Watson is actually a example of super intelligence yet. I think Watson is more of an example of machine learning, right? And then there's the idea of deep learning. So machine learning, I'm Ian, you correct me if I'm wrong, but machine learning is basically the computer just seeing like a bunch of things over and over and over again and being able to pick out what's wrong because it gets so many examples of like so many pictures of buses and it can pick out a bus. And
So there's a lot of different terms that kind of get mixed up and stuff, right? You know, we've got genetic algorithms, we've got machine learning, we've got neural nets, right? And some of them, like a lot of them are in different categories from each other. I think what we're talking about here is like the difference between weak AI and strong AI, where weak AI is any type of like machine learning process that allows a computer to do one specific task really, really well, in a way that it wasn't like programmed from scratch by a human to do that task, right? It had to develop its own method of doing that. But it's not. It doesn't do the same thing as strong AI, which is the type of artificial intelligence that we talk about when we want a computer to be able to pretend to be a human, right? To have the same capabilities as a human in just about any aspect of, you know, anything that you could do.
so Siri and like Google, the Google Assistant, what's that considered?
That would definitely be weak AI, yeah, because they've developed those for the purpose of recognizing speech, right? And then being able to look up answers to whatever it is that was being asked of them and performing that task if there was, you know, some task involved. Giving back a, you know, an audible answer if not.
So now, as far as the difference between the weak and strong AI, the Turing test, that's kind of the differentiating thing between the two, or what would you say about that?
We would need to explain the Turing test first.
So basically, the idea of the Turing test is you give an AI the opportunity to trick people into making them believe that you actually are a human. So I think as far as it goes, I think it's like one AI and like I think 5 or 6 like just normal humans have to interact like basically through like text, not through like voice communication or anything like that, with some scientists, and then they basically have to see if they can trick the scientists into believing that they could be or are a human.
Yep. And so like the Turing test is actually a really, really smart way of testing that kind of thing, because it covers like all of the bases that you could imagine. You know, if this AI system has to be able to respond to any arbitrary thing that a human could say to it, right? Then it has to have enough understanding, enough intelligence to, you know, to be at our level at the very least.
It has to be more well-rounded, and I think that's like the big thing that the smart AI versus the weak AI really has like the the differentiating is you want to be more well-rounded.
So currently we just interact in our day-to-day lives with weak AI, with Siri and Google Assistant. Is there any good examples of strong AI that's being developed right now that we can even mess with ourselves a little bit?
Well, I can't speak to what's being developed right now, but I can tell you that there aren't any like commercially available examples of strong AI.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like we're at the point where weak AI is getting really good. It can almost translate things immediately. It can play the song you want to play. It can turn your lights on. But that's like a masked intelligence. Right. It's not real intelligence. It's just they programmed it to be this way and to understand you, but it can't like think on its own.
So now, one thing that I thought was pretty interesting, and this is me kind of doing a little bit of research on another topic, and I kind of stumbled across a bit of deep learning, strong AI, is actually in the field of pro gaming. So a lot of gamers now are actually starting to go up against AI players because then they get to see angles that no human has ever done before. And the programming adapts to the play style in so many different ways that you would never expect. They can run simulations so quickly that playing against one AI would be like playing against, somebody that's played like 10,000 games before like the next match, like that, those sorts of things. So, I mean, that's just like a brief example of kind of a more like tangible way that it's being used. But I mean, that's like a very basic form of that even as well.
And I can give a little overview of some of the different ways that AI can be developed, because I think that like the different methods of doing that really speaks to kind of the different ways that we can wrap our heads around different problems. So in like early in AI development, a lot of times what they would try to do is like whatever program or whatever problem it is that they're trying to solve, they would go and get a bunch of experts in that field, right? And then kind of like ask them a bunch of questions about, how would you go about solving this thing? So if we're talking about the chess masters, right? They would like basically make a list of like, okay, if you're looking at this board, right, what do you think is going to be the good next move? What kind of strategies are there? Now that kind of thing is like very, very limited, and is going to be very slow because you have to like basically program in all of those rules by hand. Neural networks are a different way, and neural networks are really interesting to me because they basically imitate like the way that our brains work. So the anatomy of a brain is like each one of the neurons in our brain, each one of those cells has several axons that are receiving input, right? And then like each neuron is basically programmed with like a rule that if the inputs from these axons reaches a certain threshold, then I will send a signal on from to the next cell that's in the line. But if it's lower than that threshold, then I'm not going to send anything. And so neural networks are built on in computer systems very similarly. We have like an input. Neural networks are usually used for like things like picture recognition or voice recognition, right? So you would feed it like the JPEG image, right, that you've got. And you would have like the first layer of neurons, right, each one of those would be specialized for recognizing a very particular thing in that picture, right? So you'd have one neuron that might look at a pixel and go, okay, is this pixel surrounded by other pixels of the same color, right? Or maybe it would be like, recognizing like vertical lines in a picture, right? So it would say like, all right, are the pixels on to the left and right of this one darker? And are the pixels that are up like above and below it, the same kind of color? and individually, each one of those neurons can't recognize very much, right? But then they feed the output of what they have recognized into the next layer of neurons, right? And we as the human programmers, we don't actually have to put in all of like the rules. We just kind of start with a ground base neural network, and we see if it can recognize anything. And if it can't, then it'll like we have a different program make a couple of copies of that neural network, and then tweak a few things about it, just randomly tweaking. And then if either of those can recognize stuff better than the old version, then that becomes the new best version, right? So then we make copies of that one, and we tweak it a little bit, and then we see if those ones can recognize stuff in the picture better than before, and so we kind of slowly make our way to a good solution.
It's very difficult to do, like just to mimic the way the human brain thinks, and just how complicated our brain is. Just all the little simple tasks we take for granted, like walking, talking, all sorts of things, recognizing people's faces, their expressions, what they're trying to get across with their hand motions. There's so many things that our brain does that a computer can't do currently, but it's getting better and better. Like computers now can write books. They can compose music on their own. They can there's all sorts of different things computers can do on their own now that they couldn't do before, and we're slowly getting there. One thing I would like to talk about real quick is a lot of these forward-thinking scientists, they're trying to develop ways to get the human consciousness onto a computer, and a bunch of I forget his name. There's a well-known scientist that's really research. Is it Elon Musk that wants to do this?
I think Elon Musk wants to do just about everything.
That's true.
So he's a safe bet.
It's a safe bet. Okay, so these rich billionaires, they know that they only have like a small window of time before they age out and lose their like current ability to think. So they're really it's dropping billions and millions of dollars into research into how to get the human brain onto a computer so that either it could be augmented and work better, which I don't know why we would need. Well, I guess we would need it eventually, or that it can withstand the test of time. So you in effect program out death.
Yeah. And so that gets into senescence is the name of like the scientific field for studying how we can, lengthen people's lives indefinitely. So
yeah, so that's right now that's in the I'd say that's in the base stages. So do you think that's something that will come after the Singularity?
Yeah, and I think that like nanotechnology is so there's kind of two parts to the Singularity, like two main ingredients that are going to be really, really crucial. AI, which we've been talking about, and then nanotechnology. And nanotechnology is, going to be, I think, the really important way that the artificial intelligence can interface with the physical world. And in terms of like the human body, especially if you think about like, all right, we want to be able to repair anything that goes wrong in the human body. Nanotechnology is the best way to go about that, right? Because you can go straight to the source. If you've got somebody's, right, their heart isn't, like as strong as it used to be, right? We can just like go in there and change whatever it is inside the heart, each individual cell, to get it back to optimal levels.
Yeah, did anybody find? I know I've seen robots the size of ants, and there's a lab that was making robots the size of ants and flying bird robots, but I don't think we have the technology right now to make a nanorobot. But I think we're trying to shrink down the computer down to that size, and I feel like that's going to be very beneficial, like you said, to repair the body, the structures of the body, and to be able to image like your bloodstream and to see like where there could be problem areas. We kind of want that now. Who wants a probe stuck in your private areas. Like if you could just put a nanobot in there, right?
Right. Well, here's the thing. So everything that has an upside also has a downside. So when we actually have the information and the technology to be able to start doing these things, where we have nanobots the size of a blood cell, now we're going to have to either democratize that information and make sure that it's as prevalent as possible, so it doesn't fall into the hands of a very few, and then they, put that power over top of us. But then when you do that also, you also will give people the opportunity to use that information, that technology for bad. So now we're getting into a spot where certain people are going to have to earn the right to understand this technology and have access to this technology, because once we have nanobots like going around repairing our cells and whatnot, what's stopping someone from reprogramming one to basically become a nanovirus? And once you make a nanovirus, what is it? I mean, it's an invasive species. Like, what is a defense against that?
And if you want to know more about that, on the Extra Dimension, we got in a long debate about how to stop a nanobot. So that's a little tease for the Extra Dimension episode.
Nice.
How to defend ourselves from the nanobot uprising.
Here's a little hint: karate won't help.
So here's a little tidbit that I would say. Is we can take a look at a past event, a past trend, and kind of compare it to how nanotechnology might be developed in the future. Information technology over the course of, the late 20th century and early 21st century, right? That was developed by a lot of independent groups, right? Very little regulation in the sector. If you think about it in those terms, it's like, man, it's a miracle that the internet exists and that you and I are able to speak to each other over it, and that we have all of this infrastructure in our country now that like everything runs on computers. And, how is it that we haven't had a catastrophic, like somebody attacked a critical system, took it down with a computer virus, right? And it's very true. Like, computer viruses exist. They are a thing that we have to worry about. But also because of like the economic incentives of all of the like the democratized model of how we developed computer technologies, right? Like the parties that have our best interests at heart had the economic incentive to make those secure, right? Because otherwise nobody would use them. And so I think that's the same kind of model that we'll have to follow when developing nanotechnology, right? Is we're going to have to develop immunities using nanotechnology to prevent other nanotechnology from
the fact
messing with us.
The fact of the matter, though, is it costs lots and lots of money to do this research and to even come up with this in the first place, and lots of like research and development. And most criminals or people who are out to get us aren't going to have that type of resource to develop this. So I feel like once it's actually developed, maybe they can take that and run with it. But I don't see like some nefarious group coming up with this research before a Google or an Apple or an Amazon type of, even our government.
I don't think that the nefarious groups would be the ones on the cutting edge, but I mean, you just got to think like the technology, once it gets so far past a certain point, even like the simplest stuff can cause quite a bit of problems.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like crime is still going down, but I mean, the power of each individual is going up. So I don't know. It's just one of those things where like I always just want to feel like we are hesitantly going into the future and not just going full force because nothing bad's ever going to happen. It's like, no. We need to take a little bit of a step back and just make sure we prepare for the worst and hope for the best.
So I think one other thing that Ian kind of alluded to a little bit is the idea that we kind of have to grow with the computers. We have to kind of keep ourselves up with them. So as computers advance, and eventually when they reach once we reach the singularity, computers can keep exponentially growing faster and faster, and they won't need us to help develop new computers or new sciences or new things. Like they'll kind of just it'll be a runaway thing. Mm-hmm. It'll be a runaway. We won't be able to have any control in it. We won't be able to control it at all really anymore. And Ian was talking about how we could do biological upgrades to our own body to keep up with the computer.
Become augmented.
Yeah, it's true. So there's little things like Harrison was saying earlier. You could replace your eyes. You can replace your limbs. You can upgrade different things about your body eventually. I guess that will help a little bit. But the idea of us, using computers to increase our mind or like our capacity to understand things, that's interesting. And I'm not sure how far away we are from that either.
I think that's the big one, honestly.
We kind of need that, though. If we kind of need to be somewhat equal to computers eventually if we let computers run away with it. So I feel like that's kind of a necessary technology to have figured out before we reach this singularity, because then we're just basically second-class citizens.
That's one of the big debates is like, okay, awesome. Now we have these awesome robots that are taking all of our jobs. Now what are we going to do? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And now it's not directly programmed into, I'm mind blanking on the exact term for it, but it's like basically like the AI protocol where it's like, I will not hurt a human, I will not aid in hurting a human, and I will, not destroy
Isaac
humanity.
Asimov's, laws of robotics.
The laws of robotics. There you go. So like in a way, we're basically creating a caretaker, I think is a way to kind of like think of it. Like we're basically designing what is going to replace us. And so we have an opportunity to be like, hey, look, like we're creating you, but your job is to serve us, even if that means that you just have to give us a job so that at least we don't fall into a depression and kill ourselves. Just make us feel like we are needed. How about that? Thank you.
Yeah, make us feel worthwhile. Tell us some jokes, computers, and make us feel good. So how far are we away? Harrison said 2029, and somebody else said 20. Ray Kurzweil said 2049, I believe. Or
no, I think Ray said 2029. That's where I'm getting my number from.
So I read his book that he wrote in 2004 or 5, and in that one he was estimating 2045.
Oh, 45.
I'm not sure if he has tweaked his number since then, since 2005 was 13 years ago. Which is crazy to say.
Yeah, he might have, because nobody really saw smartphones coming out, and nobody saw that really. Those kind of hit everybody, and that's another thing is how quickly new things come up. Like once something new comes out, how quickly that grows and like explodes. Like compare a smartphone from like 8 years ago to a smartphone now, like a night and day difference. They're barely even similar. So that's how quick when something new comes out, that's how quick that's how quick it advances. And so, think of the internet, like, or high speed internet. In my lifetime, we've gone from dial-up internet to, a little bit faster dial-up internet to DSL internet through your phone jack to crazy speeds like gigabit speeds where you can download a song in like 2 seconds. Whereas when I was younger, you could download a song in 5 hours.
Right. And 5 hours was actually pretty good. It's like, oh wow, only 5 hours? Oh my gosh, what a deal.
Come on, Mike. Everybody's downloading podcasts these days. Nobody listens to music anymore.
That's true. I've lost my love for music since podcasts came out. I'm like, to me, almost music feels like a waste of time compared. Like I could be learning something on a podcast or listening to music, which is more beneficial to me at this time. Probably learning.
You should put some music on in the background of listening to a podcast. There you go, multitasking.
That's what we'll do. We'll put in Adele's first record to the backing of this episode, and you can listen to all of Adele's music on the back of this episode. So check
We'll have absolutely no copyright problems with that at all.
That copyright doesn't matter. We don't make money off this podcast. Or some people think we do, but we don't. So, Ian, do you have anything else we might have missed or any other comments real quick before we start wrapping things up?
Well, yeah, so I guess in terms of like being worried about being left behind by the technology, I think that like nanotechnology is going to be a really important way for us to be able to keep up, because like if we slowly augment the parts of our bodies that we can as we develop, better and better technology, right? Whatever technology goes into making an AI faster, right, and being able to process stuff better, we should also be able to apply that to our own brains, right? Because the signals that go from one neuron to the next are a lot slower than the computer signals, the electrical signals that we use in a transistor chip, for example. The difference is that like the distribution of neurons, the way that they're all connected together, is really, really good for a lot of the stuff that we do as physical humans, right? Being able to instantaneously recognize what we're seeing, what we're hearing, right? That current computer chips are not as good at doing. So if we can just like speed one thing up about the brain, which is being able to transmit from one neuron to the next faster, then that'll be a huge step for improving the human brain, the human mind, by a lot. And so I think that that's kind of the pathway that we should pursue, so that like the AIs that exist in this world, right, that are going to be designing the next best thing, are literally just humans who have basically had their brains, upgraded to the point where like they are as fast as this AI system that we may be developing in parallel.
When you hear about all these like upgrading your body and that sort of thing, it's like, I don't know, it's kind of freaky. So just think of all the first like levels of technology when it first comes out. Like the first cell phones were really annoying. They were really big and ugly and janky. Like I'm gonna be one of those late adopters to all of this kind of stuff. Because just imagine this. Once people start like upgrading their eyes and their limbs and all this kind of stuff, there's gonna be some people walking around with some really weird stuff going on. I mean, just look at all the people with plastic surgery mishaps and whatnot. I mean, take that and multiply by 5, and now you made some real permanent damage going on. So as far as like how all this stuff is playing out and the singularity and trying to keep up with it, I'm not going to try to keep up with it. I'm just going to try to survive. And you know what? I'm just going to see what happens. And if there is some technology that proves to actually be well integrated into the human body without any major adverse effects and isn't going to steal your humanity and your like, just your actual like not willpower, but like
your consciousness.
Yeah, your consciousness. Because it's like, okay, here, we're going to program something so that when you use it, technically you don't have consciousness, but it's going to act like you do. So you're going to trick a bunch of people into, implementing this technology, but really you're just integrating into a Borg and you're going to be my slave now. Like there's going to be stuff like that. So, just watch out, people.
Funny thing is our brain is a computer. Our brain is a bunch of electrical pulses going back and forth. And so in a sense, we are almost a biological computer.
Oh, yeah.
In a sense.
I'm really good at pretending that I have consciousness.
Do you guys have anything else?
Well, if people want to hear more about that topic of, consciousness, what is the essence of being human, right? This would be a great time to go and listen to the episode of The Extra Dimension that we recorded. That's thenexus.tv/TED31 again.
All right, stop plugging your stuff, Ian. Even though I was on that episode. It was probably the best episode they've ever recorded, honestly.
Oh, by orders of magnitude.
So, yeah, you can hit up Ian on The Extra Dimension. Link will be in the description. You can find us on the Future Jam on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Join our conversation on our discourse page. We have people pop in there every now and again and say something trite. So it's interesting. It's fun. Tweet at us at the Future Jam on Twitter with any ideas or questions or anything like that. And yeah, hit up the Extra Dimension for ethical considerations and the whole thing about the singularity. I don't know. We'll cut this out. All right, hit up the Extra Dimension. Okay, I'm screwing up this whole end. Hit up the extra. Clapping. Hit up the Extra. I can't do it now. Okay, hit up the Extra Dimension for the ethical. Whatever. Just hit up the Extra Dimension, people.
Well done.
All right, Ian, where can they reach you?
You can find me personally on Twitter as Ian R. Buck, or you can take a look at my woefully incomplete website, ianrbuck.com, that has links to other stuff that I do.
And Harrison, where can the good folks find you if they don't want to talk to me on the Future Jam Twitter? Well, you're actually on there too.
Yeah. Technically, I do some of the Twitter stuff, but you have to find me in person. As much as I talk about technology, I actually kind of avoid it as much as possible. I like being out there in nature. I like to see God's work at play. So, you know what? Come find me.
And if you get a motorcycle, you could be zipping around the neighborhood with Harrison and his wife, my sister, on their new shiny motorcycles whenever they get them.
That's right.
So thanks for joining us, and join the Extra Dimension. Whatever.